All right, deep divers, buckle up because today
Oh, yeah.
we're plunging headfirst into a topic that's both intensely personal and universally relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer.
Yes.
Specifically, we're looking at prayer through the lens of the Yahweh tradition.
Okay.
You know, those whispered hopes, those desperate pleas,
Right.
those moments when we reach out, maybe to a deity, maybe just to the universe itself.
It's funny, isn't it? We send out these signals, almost like radio waves, hoping something is listening.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is how these very personal expressions of longing often tap into a shared human experience.
Mhm.
This need for connection, for comfort, for something bigger than ourselves.
Totally. And today's source material, this Don't Be Afraid devotional, takes that idea and grounds it in a very specific belief system.
Okay.
The belief in Yahweh, I have to admit, I was immediately drawn to that title.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
It feels so timely, so relevant to the world we're living in right now. I mean, just scrolling through the news or social media can feel like a constant barrage of reasons to be anxious.
Oh, absolutely. It's like fear is the background music of our lives these days.
Totally.
And this devotional doesn't shy away from that. It
Okay.
actually starts with a quote from Deuteronomy 31:8.
Okay.
Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you.
Wow.
It's basically saying, hey, I get it. Things are scary out there, but hang on because I've got you.
Okay, that's powerful stuff. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of those hang in there baby kitten posters from the 80s,
Uh-huh.
but with a much deeper theological context, of course.
Yeah.
But, you know, something that's always intrigued me about these God is with you pronouncements is,
Yeah.
what does that actually mean?
Right?
Like, how does the Yahweh tradition reconcile this idea of a personal God who's intimately involved in our lives with the vastness of the universe
Right.
and the seemingly random nature of, well, everything?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yep.
And honestly, it's a question that theologians have been grappling with for centuries.
Sure.
But I think what's interesting about this particular devotional is how it tries to bridge that gap between the cosmic and the personal.
Okay.
It emphasizes God's constant presence as a source of strength and courage, particularly when we're facing challenges.
Yeah.
It's like saying, yeah, the universe might feel chaotic,
Right.
but I'm here in the trenches with you, offering support and guidance every step of the way.
So it's less about God controlling every little detail of our lives and more about providing a kind of spiritual framework,
Right.
a sense of being held even when things feel like they're falling apart.
Exactly. It's not about God micromanaging the universe, but about offering a constant source of love,
Okay.
strength and guidance to those who choose to connect with him. And the way we tap into that connection, according to this devotional, is through prayer.
Which makes sense. I mean, if we're talking about a personal relationship with God, there has to be some form of communication.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm curious,
Right.
this devotional uses the phrase life without fear. Is that really attainable?
Yeah.
Are we supposed to just shut off all those natural human responses to danger and uncertainty?
Yeah.
Because honestly, that feels a bit unrealistic, even for someone deeply rooted in faith.
Right. It's not about becoming some kind of emotionless robot.
Okay.
The devotional acknowledges that fear is a natural part of the human experience.
Sure.
It's wired into our DNA for survival.
Right.
But what it's suggesting is that faith can provide a kind of anchor,
Okay.
a grounding force that allows us to experience fear without being completely consumed by it. It's about shifting the power dynamic.
Yeah.
So fear doesn't hold the ultimate control.
So it's less about eliminating fear altogether and more about choosing how we respond to it. Like fear might show up at the door,
Okay.
but we don't have to invite it in for tea and let it take over the house.
That's a great analogy. The devotional is full of these little nuggets of wisdom that encourage us to confront our fears.
Oh, yeah.
Not from a place of denial or suppression,
Right.
but from a place of faith and trust in God's presence.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that even in the midst of chaos and uncertainty, there's a deeper reality,
Yeah.
a source of unwavering strength that we can tap into through prayer.
Okay.
And that's where things get really interesting, because if prayer is this direct line to a source of unwavering strength, as this devotional suggests,
Right.
then the question becomes, how do we actually use it? What does it look like to really tap into that power?
Okay. Yeah, that's where I get tripped up sometimes. Like, is there a right way to pray? A magic formula? Because growing up, I remember being taught these very formal prayers, all thee and thou and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
It felt more like reciting a script than having an actual conversation.
I think a lot of people can relate to that experience. And what's interesting is that This devotional actually pushes back against that kind of rigid, formulaic approach to prayer.
Okay.
It emphasizes a more personal, conversational style,
Yeah.
encouraging readers to speak to God in their own words, to share their fears and anxieties openly and honestly. It's about authenticity,
Yeah.
vulnerability, really letting God in on what's going on in your heart and mind.
So it's less about getting the wording perfect and more about the intention,
Right.
the genuine desire to connect.
Yes.
I like that. It feels less intimidating, more accessible somehow.
Absolutely. It's about creating space for dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
for a back and forth exchange,
Mm-hmm.
where you're not just presenting a laundry list of requests,
Yeah.
but actually listening for guidance, for comfort, for a
Mhm.
sense of peace that can only come from a deeper connection with the divine.
You know, it's interesting, as you mentioned listening.
Right.
And often when we talk about prayer, it's all about what we're saying,
Yeah.
what we're asking
Mhm.
for. But the idea of listening for God's response, that feels a bit more mysterious, even a bit mystical, right?
It definitely adds another layer to the whole experience, and this devotional touches on that as well.
Okay.
It talks about how sometimes God's answers come in unexpected ways through subtle nudges, through the kindness of strangers, through a sudden shift in perspective.
Oh, wow.
It's about being open to those synchronicities, those moments of grace that might not fit our preconceived notions of what a divine intervention should look like.
So it's not always about these booming voices from the heavens or parting seas, but more about paying attention to the whispers,
Right.
the subtle signs that we might otherwise miss if we're not attuned to that frequency.
Precisely. And I think that's where faith comes in. It's about trusting that even when we don't see or hear a clear response,
Yeah.
God is still present, still working behind the scenes in ways we might not fully comprehend.
Okay.
It's about surrendering to that mystery, that unknowing, and having faith that ultimately we're being guided and supported even when it doesn't feel like it.
That's a powerful concept.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's interesting because we often associate faith with certainty, with having all the answers.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is almost the opposite.
Right.
It's about embracing the unknown, the not knowing, and finding peace in that surrender.
I think you've hit on something really profound there, because true faith isn't about blind adherence to dogma or clinging to rigid beliefs.
Okay.
It's about having the courage to let go, to trust in something bigger than ourselves, even when we can't fully grasp or explain it.
Right.
And that kind of surrender, that willingness to embrace the mystery, can be incredibly liberating.
It kind of takes the pressure off, doesn't
Yeah,
it? It's
yeah.
like saying, okay, I don't have to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
I can let go of this need to control everything and just trust that I'm being guided even when the path ahead isn't clear.
Exactly. And that's where the don't be afraid message comes full circle. It's about recognizing that fear often stems from this illusion of control, this belief that we have to manage every aspect of our lives to avoid chaos and uncertainty.
Yeah.
But true peace, true freedom comes from surrendering to something bigger than ourselves, trusting that even in the midst of the unknown, we're not alone.
Which brings us back to this idea of prayer
Yeah.
as a way to tap into that deeper reality.
Right.
That sense of being held and supported even when things feel scary or uncertain.
Yeah.
But I'm curious,
Yeah.
in the context of this devotional, what does it actually mean to apply this idea of fearlessness in our daily lives? Like, does it mean we should just ignore our gut instincts
Yeah.
and walk into dangerous situations blindly?
Right.
Because that doesn't sound particularly wise or spiritually enlightened.
And that's where discernment comes in. It's not about throwing caution to the wind,
Okay.
about recognizing that fear can sometimes hold us back from living fully, from pursuing our dreams, from standing up for what we believe in.
Yeah.
The devotional challenges us to examine those areas where fear might be limiting us, where it might be keeping us stuck in patterns of behavior that no longer serve us.
So it's about recognizing the difference between fear that's rooted in genuine danger and fear that's simply holding us back from stepping into our full potential.
Right.
Like if I'm afraid of public speaking,
Okay.
that's different from being afraid of walking alone in a dark alley at night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the devotional encourages us to lean on our faith, on our connection with God, to help us navigate those fears, to discern which ones are serving us and which ones are holding us captive.
Right.
It's about having the courage to ask ourselves, what would I do if I weren't afraid?
Yeah.
And then using prayer as a tool to tap into the strength and guidance we need to take those steps, even if they feel scary or uncertain.
That's such a great point.
Yeah.
Because often our biggest fears aren't about physical danger, but about those internal barriers, those self-imposed limitations that keep us playing small.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where prayer can be most transformative.
Right.
Not in magically erasing those fears,
Mm-hmm.
but in giving us the courage to face them, to move through them,
Yeah.
and to ultimately emerge stronger and more resilient on the other side.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that fear is a part of life.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be the defining factor. We have the power to choose how we respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And prayer can be an incredibly powerful tool in that process.
Yeah.
It allows us to tap into a source of strength and wisdom that's far greater than our own, guiding us towards a life that's more aligned with our purpose and our potential.
It feels like we're talking about a whole different definition of fearlessness here.
Yeah.
Not the absence of fear, but this radical acceptance of it.
Mm-hmm.
This willingness to walk through it hand in hand with faith.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And what's striking about this devotional is how it frames that journey, that process of walking through fear as an active collaboration with God.
Right.
It's not about passively waiting for some divine intervention, but about actively engaging with our faith, using prayer as a tool to tap into that reservoir of strength and guidance.
It reminds me of that idea of praying without ceasing that you often hear in religious circles.
Right.
It's not necessarily about spending all day on your knees in some monastic cell, but about cultivating this ongoing internal dialogue with the divine, this constant awareness of God's presence in our lives.
Exactly. It's about integrating faith into the fabric of our daily experience, not just relegating it to Sunday mornings or times of crisis.
Okay.
And that's where this devotional gets really practical.
Yeah.
It actually ends with a specific prayer, a beautifully crafted expression of surrender and trust that really encapsulates the core message of don't be afraid.
You know, I was struck by the structure of that prayer. It starts with this acknowledgement of fear, this very human plea for help.
Right.
It says, Lord, I choose to focus on your presence in my life today.
Right.
Help me to remember that I need not fear because you are with me.
Okay.
It's almost like the writer is reminding themselves of this truth, this foundational belief that God is always present.
And that's so key, right? Because in the midst of fear, it's easy to lose sight of that bigger picture.
Yeah.
To get caught up in the immediacy of our anxieties and forget that we're not alone in this. The prayer is a way of reorienting ourselves, of consciously shifting our focus from fear to faith.
And then it goes a step further, right?
Yeah.
It moves from acknowledgement to action, asking for strength to resist fear and to trust in God's promises. It says, strengthen my faith and help me to trust in your promises.
Right.
It's like saying, okay, I believe you're with me, but I need your help to actually live that out, to make choices that are aligned with that belief.
It's about bridging the gap between belief and action, between knowing something intellectually and actually embodying it in our daily lives.
Right.
And that's where the real transformation happens. Because it's one thing to say, I believe God is with me, but it's another thing entirely to live as if that were true.
Okay.
To make decisions, to take risks, to step outside of our comfort zones, knowing that we're not doing it alone.
And maybe that's the true measure of fearlessness, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it, to trust in something bigger than ourselves, even when the path ahead is uncertain. It's like saying, okay, fear, I see you, I acknowledge you, but I'm not going to let you call the shots. No. I'm choosing faith. I'm choosing trust. I'm choosing to move forward with courage and conviction, knowing that I'm not alone in this journey.
I think that's a beautiful summation of the message this devotional is trying to convey. It's not about denying the reality of fear, but about transforming our relationship with it.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that fear is a part of the human experience, but it doesn't have to define us. We have the power to choose how we respond to it. And prayer can be an incredibly powerful tool in that process.
Yeah.
It allows us to tap into a source of strength and wisdom that's far greater than our own.
Okay.
Guiding us towards a life that's more aligned with our purpose and our potential.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the power of prayer and the concept of a life without fear, I want to leave you with this question to ponder.
Okay.
If you were to write your own prayer based on this devotional and the words of Deuteronomy 31.8, what would it say? What fear would you ask for help overcoming? Yeah. And how would you seek to connect with this idea of God's unwavering support?